Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's very special Modern Sales Pros panel. Today, we're going to be talking about sales coaching with the three bald amigos. This is going to be a fun one. I've had a blast prepping with Richard Harris and Brandon on our content today. And Richard Harris, it's amazing. You've been such a long time MSP member, but it's actually been almost a year since we've had you on and at an MSP event. So with our virtual events, we've got a little bit of a tradition. For first-time panelists, we always like to learn a little bit more about any hobbies or skills that you've developed since the start of the coronavirus pandemic. You are muted, Mr. Harris.
And we're off to a great start.
That is exactly standard. My friend Scott Leese will be thrilled to know that I continue this tradition from our podcast. I think the one skill I have worked on actually is our podcast and getting better at interviewing people and listening more, which I know as a sales trainer and a sales leader, people are like, well, aren't you supposed to be good at it? One would think, but it's not always possible. So I think I've gotten better at that. On the personal side, we did some remodeling of the house. So, you know, I could probably run my own HGTV show now on how to remodel and, you know, what the cost of a certain knob in the bathroom means financially and emotionally to everyone. So it's a skill I never thought I would ever want to have. And I'm still not sure I do want to have it, but I've clearly gotten it. So that's my newest skill.
I feel like there's a direct applicability to sales, the emotional attachment with the knob in the bathroom. I think there's a hook right there. And if this sales coaching thing doesn't work out for the three of us, I think we could there's an HGTV show here for remodeling homes, like the three bald amigos remodel backyards.
That's what we did. So yes.
And Brandon, it's always a pleasure to have you back, and we're excited to be joined by you again. Any other mastery that your daughters had of the fried rice game? Have there been any up levels? And just for folks who this may be your first exposure to Brandon, he's had his daughter cook fried rice. What was it, like 40 times in a row?
100 times.
My goodness.
It's not too hard. 100 days in a row. And she's done it every day for lunch because she's been doing school from home. So she gets up, she gets the wok fired up, and she's actually mastered a few different styles. I think the thing that she's done the best is gotten the egg right. The egg is really hard to either undercook or overcook and cook just right. And getting the egg added in the right time is actually the hardest part, I think.
Oh, this is good. We'll have to, when we can get together in person, we can go and have some fried rice from Brandon and Richard. We can go hang out in your remodeled house. I think that sounds like a fun time to do it live.
Backyard. Hey, I have a quick question. I'd love for people to go into the chat and just type in where you're dialing in from. It's always cool to see that, you know, what city you're in, what state you're in. So anyway, but go ahead.
No, I love it. And this is actually a great kickoff for us. So today, the three of us, the three bald amigos, are going to be talking about sales coaching. We're going to be dispelling some maybe preconceived or poorly conceived notions, some myths and otherwise. But before we jump into that, there we go, if I can get the slides to advance. Today's content and today's program is hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you who don't know, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest community for revenue leaders. So those are folks in sales management, sales and revenue operations, and the related supporting disciplines. Our mission is to create an environment for our community members where they can answer the most difficult questions they'd otherwise struggle to solve on their own. We do that through both our robust online discussion through our forum and through pulling together amazing content programs like what we have today, where we bring in some experts and talk about a particular topic of interest. And in the future, we hope to get back to in-person events, which were a whole heck of a lot of fun. The great parts about the community, when you're asking a question, you're not just getting perspective from one or two organizations at one or two different sizes. Here you've got a small sampling of organizations that have community members. We've got about 6,000 different organizations across our 20,000 and growing members. And membership is free. So those of you who are not members, you'll be invited to join afterwards, and we really hope you will. But today's content wouldn't be possible without the sponsorship of the team at Set Sail. I'm going to hand it over to Brandon to say a few words about Set Sail. Brandon?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. And I'll probably do this more of in a coaching context, because Set Sail actually helps a lot with coaching as well. But we've designed a platform that is able to collect all the information inside of your sales organization and understand the conversations going on between reps and prospects, understand what's working in your sales process, but then deploy a really unique incentive model that makes sure that all of your reps on every deal are following best practices. And ultimately that leads to about a 15% improvement in revenue performance per rep in about 12 weeks.
Awesome. And we're excited as always to be working with Brandon and Set Sail, but let's jump into it. Let's get to talking about this. Really excited to pull this program together. I think there's a lot of misconceptions. I think there's a lot of maybe under-informed opinions, and we're going to talk about a lot of that today. I am really excited though to be joined by Richard Harris. I think he's one of the most prolific contributors in the Modern Sales Pros online community. He's somebody who's amazing. If you've ever had a chance to listen to his podcast or attend some of the other events that he's done, he's really one of the brightest minds that we have in our community. And I'm stealing a little bit of your thunder here, Richard, but it really is an honor to have you joining us here today.
It makes me uncomfortable to hear you say that, but thank you. I appreciate it. And I need to get the snippet of that for my wife to hear about how wonderful I am, and my kids probably more so than her. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Awesome. And we've got Brandon as well from the team at Set Sail. Brandon, you want to just say a quick intro for yourself here?
Yeah, I run all operations at Set Sail, and like you, Richard, my children have a love-hate relationship with me, especially as they've entered the teen years. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I'm right behind you.
With that, we can get into parenting tips, we can get into coaching tips, we can get into a bunch of different things, and probably will today. Just two housekeeping notes.
You coach your kids like you coach your team, but that doesn't mean you treat your team, anybody, like a child. But they're very similar techniques I use in both worlds.
I think there's a couple analogies I'm sure we'll be making throughout about child rearing here. For our attendees, just two housekeeping notes. Please do use the Q&A panel for questions that you have. If you have disagreement, you don't believe something we're saying, you want us to dive in a little bit more, you want to just ask a question, go ahead and use that. And then secondly, and most importantly, because it's the first question that's always asked, the recording will be made available shortly after the session here today. So for those of you furiously taking notes, that's great, but you're going to have the recording to take a look at afterwards. But let's jump into this. Excuse me there. So we're going to talk today about the top 5 mistakes that sales managers make. And this is all through the lens of really sales coaching and what we can do to put our organizations in the best position to create amazing outcomes for the organization and for the people in there. The first, and this I think was the first thing that we talked about when we were preparing for this, is really misunderstanding the job. And this is one of those ones where it's like, well, hold on, say I'm a sales manager, I know what that means. But what we had talked about a little bit here, and Brandon, I'd love for you to kind of get started with this, but really most folks become a sales manager because they were top AE. So it creates some misunderstanding here.
Yeah, and I think reasonably so, right? Because when you get that role, let's just take a scenario where you move from AE to sales manager. Effectively, your quota has gone up. You had $1 million quota before. Now you have a $12 million quota that covers the team. And so your obligation to the organization is to deliver $12 million. But I think a lot of people then confuse that when they look at their team and go, okay, well, I have the same obligation to my team. I need to suck $1 million out of each one of these reps. And really, it's different. Your obligation to your team is to help them grow. Your obligation to the team is to help them do the things that they don't have the motivation in and of themselves to change in order to achieve greater results that are going to help their careers along, right? It's not about the $1 million. It's about every single person on that team advancing the skills that are going to help them to get that next job in their career.
Yeah, I'll jump in on this too a little bit, is that, in the prep, I was saying we need to get rid of the sales manager title. if you're a frontline leader over a team, you're not a manager, you're a coach. And just by saying that, look, there's a difference between being the equipment manager on the team and the linebacker coach. Those are two very different roles. So I think that's part of it. And going back and just going a little bit deeper on what Brandon said is that, we get promoted because we are product experts. We can handle objections. We can follow a process. We can do all these things. And maybe we helped onboard somebody, right? Like maybe we got to be so good at them. But nowhere in those skills, nowhere, particularly in sales, do I see, oh, they have a skill of learning how to manage someone out of a problem. They have a skill to learn how to coach someone really, really well. I've seen them do 15 coaching calls, so I know they're going to be a good coach, right? All we do is we look at the revenue number. So the human skills are never actually defined when you're promoting from within. In most cases, like a big organizations, you probably can do that better, right? Like, if you're starting to get to that, even just at that gong level or those larger companies, you can do those things, but you can't really do that in smaller companies, right? You're going with your best bet, and then you're hoping they know how to manage a person or coach a person. And I think that's the part that's often overlooked. And I think leadership needs to start to recognize that a little bit more, and not say you shouldn't promote from within because of it, but just manage your own expectations a bit more.
And Richard, you're a professional coach. I mean, that's what you do for a living. Sorry, I'm just going to jump in with a question though, because is somebody who's a good sales manager necessarily a good sales coach? Is coaching, a separate set of skills?
That's my point. Like that's if they're a good manager, it means they're, in my mind, right? And people, please chime in on the chat. Like, this is the fun part where I love people to chat up stuff. If you're good as a sales manager, but you're not a good sales coach, then you should be in ops. That means you're good at looking at the data, you're good at running dashboards, and it doesn't mean you can't be supportive to the sales team. But if you're uncomfortable giving feedback, if you're uncomfortable, how do I say this, or just being direct or talking to your team about what they need to do differently, or managing the negative rep, even though they're the best rep, if you are uncomfortable with that, then, that's not the right leadership role. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be in leadership. I don't want to misinterpret it. I just think now, particularly in sales, as we become more specialized, you can find a specialization that suits you better and makes it more engaging for you and for the team.
Is that incumbent upon us as leaders in the organization to set the right expectations, right? I feel like in sales, there's this idea, I'm an SDR, and then I become an AE, and then I become an an AE manager, and then a VP.
Yeah. Look, use your SDR role as a gateway drug to find great employees. Like, who in the world at 20 something knows what they want to be for the rest of their life? And sure as hell don't know what they want to be in sales. I could interview probably more than half of everybody's sales teams who's listening here had no desire to go into sales, right? In fact, some of the best salespeople are the degenerates who fail out of every other product or every other job they've ever gotten into. I love hiring those people. I love hiring people who've gone through some hardship in life, because I know that they know how to overcome their biggest objection, which is themselves. And that's what I'm looking for. So yeah, so stop treating your SDRs like the only pathway is to a sales role. Get out of here with that. That's so 2009.
Oh, so 2009. I think there's also a misconception when folks are looking at manager roles, right? I think they really like the title. Like, who doesn't like to hang mom, dad, girlfriend, boyfriend? I just got promoted. I'm a manager now, but not the responsibility. And Richard, I love that point about, like, I think you had said this, you're afraid to be unpopular. Like, yeah. Well,
that's the role. Yeah. There you go.
Sorry, it's really lonely at some points in time being a manager.
I had a woman I worked for many years ago. She said, you know what? Sometimes we are literally God's greatest gift to our sales team, and sometimes they look at us like we eat babies. Like, it just depends. Like, sometimes I'm just a baby eater, right? And it's terrible, but it's true.
It's also, I think there was an analogy that I've heard before where it's you can't get on the roller coaster anymore, right? Like there's all the, you feel all of the ups and downs and the challenges of being in a high growth organization, but you can't contribute to those problems on your team. You have to be cool. Yep. Richard, you're going through those ups and downs and work you through it versus a situation where it's like, oh my God, I'm enmeshing in your emotions. And I think that's tough. That's really tough for a lot of folks.
Yeah, I feel like there's an intro talk that needs to happen to everybody when, even if, if it's any general management, but especially in sales management. And I always have this talk with people, even when they talk about wanting to go into management, that I wouldn't wish management on my worst enemy, right? I mean, if you're not passionate about it, it will eat you alive because, if you're doing a good job, it's going to take emptying yourself. It's going to take you stop focusing on yourself and focus on these, 8 to 12 other people who are now, your responsibility. And so you've now sort of multiplied your responsibility when it comes to people, right? And to do that, you're going to have to lose a part of yourself.
Yeah, I think it's a very good way to sum it up. I want to come back to this and make sure we've got something a little bit tactical for folks as we're kind of talking about this not understanding the job. Richard, what can we do as organizations to really help people getting into management understand what the role is and set them up for a little bit of success? I know we'll talk about a bunch of things further about coaching specifically, but anything that we can do organizationally to just make sure folks know what they're getting into on the management point, aside from Brandon's scared straight. You're muted again.
I mute myself so I don't try to dominate the conversation because I do have that habit. I think honestly, it's the same thing you do in sales is you got to role play this stuff. Like you got to sit down and go, all right, I'm going to be your top rep. I just crushed my quota. It's the week before Thanksgiving. I'm excited. 4 other people on my team aren't because they're afraid they're not going to hit quota, but I'm running around screaming about, what I'm going to do with my money or whatever it is. Like, how do you manage that person? Okay, role play me. Like, how do you coach that person to be proud and excited, but be empathetic to their team? Because you can do both. I would never want someone to not be able to be excited about it, but I might turn around and go, hey man, keep being excited, right? Like, love it. I'm happy for you to talk about the things you want to do. Just be mindful of this stuff, right? Just be aware. So, my son just came in. This is the best part of working from home. Thanks, buddy. So he didn't bring me a beer, but he brought me a free. He didn't bring me a beer, but that's okay. So I think you have to role play these scenarios, and you have to role play your worst case scenario, right? Role play. Great. You know what? It's COVID. We're going to lay off 15 people. Let's talk about that. Like, I actually had to do that. I actually had to run a team once in California while we were secretly building a team in Iowa. And I had to navigate that conversation to tell the team in California, no, your job is fine. Your job is safe. You're okay. I knew they were going to get laid off in 2 months. I knew it. But I had to figure that stuff out. Nobody trained me on it. I didn't even role play with my boss. I just sort of said, okay, I'll figure it out. But that's the stuff you got to figure out. And you want to put people in the spot, but you can do it in a role play. You can do it in a humane way. And no, it's a little bit, for all my Star Trek fans, it's a little bit like the Kobayashi Maru, right? Like, this is the no-win scenario, right? Like, you're not supposed to win this argument. So how do you win, right? Do you go in and rewrite the programming code just like Kirk did? Or do you just throw yourself under the bus and own what's about to happen and accept any mistake you're willing to go through? Like, this is that hard stuff, right? That you have to manage, right? As again, one of my business coaches once told me, the soft stuff is the hard stuff. The soft skills are the hardest skills to develop, whether it's in sales or leadership or management or life. And once you kind of open your mind to that, I think it actually becomes easier when you can accept that, oh yeah, that is kind of true. Now I can get out of that. I get out of my own way and I can concentrate on figuring it out. So I'll stop there because I'll dominate.
Well, but I think there's something else tactical out there, Richard, because this is something I've done that I think has worked pretty well for me. Because I think we all have the leaderboard, right? Where reps are measuring up in terms of revenue performance or some metrics, right? But let's put that aside and let's make sure on the other end we're matching that with a list of where we see, their strengths are and where they need to improve. So that we're very intentional about engaging them every single week on both acknowledging their strengths and where they're doing well, but also getting some agreement with them on where improvement needs to be made, right? Because that's where coaching starts, is really, they're not going to improve if they're not bought in, right? And if you're at that stage still, it's not that different than a sales deal. If you're in early stages of getting them bought in, the deal's not going to close, the skill's not going to improve. So, you need to be tracking that just as well as you are their pipeline.
I think that those are great points, and it actually dovetails nicely into our second mistake that we see, which is kind of that we've heard of this before, right? The robotic manager that just make more dials and everything's going to be okay. Coaching to activity metrics here. And Brandon, I love the story that you were going with there, but let's riff on this a little bit more. Like, how does this manifest itself? What do we mean when we say activity doesn't mean progress?
I think what he means is activity doesn't mean shit. That's what he really means.
Yes, something like that. I mean, what'd you say, Richard? It's so 2009, right? I mean, I can tell how mature a sales organization is very quickly by what metrics they're measuring. And if it's all activity-based, if they're focused primarily on what reps are doing, then they're missing the big picture, right? Because what reps are doing could be producing no result in terms of productivity.
Hold on, Brandon. You said something really good, and I love digging in. What are those metrics then? Like, what are the metrics that you see them doing? Is it dials, talk time, that old school stuff that?
Let's talk about it. I mean,
shit. But what do you think they should be doing? What should they be measuring?
Well, let's start with the bad ones, right? So if you're just looking at and you're measuring things like emails sent, the talk time, number of calls made, right? The best reps, and we actually have a lot of science on this at SetSale, but the best reps are much more thoughtful and have much higher quality scores on what they're doing. And so if you think about the ratio of things like number of emails.
Stop. Quality score. What's a quality score?
Well, I'll get into that in a minute. Give me a second, Richard. I know you love to pick at me whenever
I buzzwords, man. I hate them.
I use it's fun. It's more fun if we intrigue people a little bit, and then we'll get into the quality.
No, it's not. We're salespeople. We're too impatient.
But it's as simple as how many emails are you sending to emails being received back, and in those emails received back, are you getting the response you want? Right? Are you just badgering your champion, or are you actually getting progress in the deal? Right? And progress in the deal is actually measured by customer behavior, not rep behavior. So at the end of the day, it comes down to how are you measuring the behavior of your prospects and customers?
I want to pause right there because I love what you said. Progress in the deal is measured by your prospect or your customer's behavior, not the rep behavior. I really want people to let that sink in. It's super important. And I do think too that, and I love your point of hey, what is that piece to move the deal, right? But even if I get negative feedback, I still think that's good because now I can figure out what I should be saying, right? Like even if they're like, hey, don't bother me anymore. All right, well, now I know I need to figure out what did I do or what did I say so I don't do that to the next person, right? So, but keep going. Sorry, I keep interrupting. I'll go back.
You've seen this, Rich, over time and time again. Like run a spiff and you'll see this. Run a spiff on something like talk time on phone. Run a spiff on something like anything outside of closed won business, and what you're going to see is perverse behaviors coming out of the reps, right? I mean, we had one client who I heard a story from, the rep who won the spiff contest on talk time on phone was actually calling Chipotle, and it wasn't Chipotle's corporate headquarters.
I got one better. I can top you out on that.
No, do you know who he was calling, Richard?
Yeah.
He was calling a branch chain of Chipotle. And the reason when he was exposed on this, the reason he said he was calling that is because there was a cute girl at Chipotle that he liked to talk to. And he was being incentivized to spend time on the phone, right? So what did he do? He jumped on the phone just like they told him to and did something that felt very good for him, right? Because this is the real point. At the end of the day, especially right now, every one of your reps sitting at home is defaulting to high comfort, low impact behaviors and avoiding that discomfort, that there's really challenging behaviors that don't leave them feeling good, but they don't get a pat on the back for.
Right. So what are those, define those other things that they aren't getting a pat on the back for that they should be doing? Like give people examples of that, because it's not talk time and dials, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Well, let's talk about that, right? If I'm a rep and I wake up, my inbox is full.
No, Brandon, just tell me. Like, I don't need a story. Just tell me, what should they be doing?
This is it, Richard, right? If open your inbox and the answer is right there. There are prospects who are responding to you who don't have anything else to do. They'd love to say, hey, Richard, what did you do this weekend? Yeah, it's great talking to you, right? You have a lot of engagement with them, but actually reaching that decision maker, actually reaching that person with power on the deal, that's hard. That's really hard. And that person might reject you over time and time again. And even if you get a conversation with them, is your sales manager coming around and going, hey, Richard, great job on reaching that VP of marketing, because that's what we needed to do on this deal. They're like, no, did you close the deal? Did you move it forward, right? And so I think that's the big thing, that you want to find ways to motivate doing the hard thing when they wake up in the morning, and not defaulting to responding to people who have already written them in their inbox, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Although I don't know any prospects who are turning around and asking me about how my weekend went. I probably relish that. I'd see that as a signal, right? Like Brandon, you and I've talked about buying signals. I'd be like, oh, that's a good signal, because now I have a personal relationship with them. I can ask them a business question. But I do want to go back to one story of people making the dials. I was on a team, and one day we found out that all 80 people, there were 4 managers, and out of 80, about 45 were sitting and calling the Ticketmaster line to get their talk time up and just listening to the concerts. So we all got shoved out the office for 2 days. We all got sort of, I wouldn't even call it furloughed. We were just so, don't show up for 2 days unless you decide you want to come back to work. But those things happen. But to your point, Brandon, those things happen. What I'll also say, though, is it also means that upper management has the wrong expectation. My biggest thing to say is, hey, well, can they come in and do 50 or 100 dials? I'll be like, I don't know, you're the expert. Why don't you come and do it? Let's go do it together. Let's go challenge. Because I don't mind getting on the phone. Like, I'm happy to do it. I love doing it. But I think it's when leaders have these wrong expectations, or they've read this book, again, 1987, 100 dials a day kind of stuff, dialing out of the yellow pages, which I'm sure a lot of people don't even know what that is on this podcast or this webinar. But, I remember when, so anyway, I'll digress, and let's turn it back over to Mr. Scrow.
No, I love the conversation. I feel like we could really we could spend a lot of time on just some of those bullshit metrics or vanity metrics that feel good. And, it worked in The Wolf of Wall Street, so why wouldn't it work now? Nothing has changed. What I think gets interesting is we start to talk about these difficult things that we want folks to do, right? These engaging in quality conversations when I get up in the morning. This is a great quote from Lombardi. For those of you who don't know, one of the greatest football coaches of all time. So good that they named the Super Bowl trophy after him. Winning is a habit, so is losing. You can see this. We've all been on calls when a seller has quota breath and they're just like, what do we got to do to get you into this solution today, Richard? But when we think about these, it's coaching to get somebody to do this difficult behavior, this difficult thing. How do we really set that up for success? And because we're failing at reinforcement today, right? We're not setting this up the right way. So how should we think about this, Brandon, in terms of reinforcing maybe the right behaviors that we want?
This is one where I'm at a disadvantage for Mr. Harris here, because this is his bread and butter. But let's take a metrics-based approach here, right? I'll start with the numbers. So let's say you do a sales training and 100% of it is downloaded into their brains, but they're going to lose 10% of it every week. So that means every week you're not reinforcing it. You're losing 10%. So what's actually going to stick? When you're 10 weeks out? I mean, you just wasted everybody's time. You wasted everybody's time if you're not following through week in and week out and doing it in a very personalized way. I think this is if there are 2 things I see people do, it's just not reinforcing enough, but then not personalizing it. They're like, well, I'll take this one. The worst sales managers I've seen, they try to get every rep to mimic what they do, right? It's like, well, I pitch this way, so you should pitch this way too, because it's the winning way to pitch, right? And they don't personalize it for the rep, and they don't actually look at what's going on inside that rep, right? They're like, well, you don't deliver it the same way I do, so you're doing it wrong, right? And everybody has such a different personality that they really haven't invested the time in their team to make sure that it's been personalized and that they're building the skill on their strengths, right? Not everybody shoots a 3-pointer the same way. Not everybody's great at the 3-pointer, And so you need to factor in the personality of the rep when you're thinking about reinforcement as well.
So if I understand the question correctly, I might take a slightly different approach. And it does depend, right? So if I've got a brand new rep who's coming on, yeah, you're going to do it exactly the way I say, and you're going to follow my script. And I'm 100% sold, and everybody can disagree in the chat and say, tell me how much they hate scripts, but scripting matters. And there's a huge difference between following and using a script and sounding scripted. I don't want anybody to sound scripted. So you can't allow for that authenticity that Brandon's talking about, right? But I guarantee you every single salesperson I know uses scripts. Sometimes they're teeny tiny ones. Oh, they brought up the competition. Great, say this. That's a script, right? They're giving you the budget objection. Here's how you say it. That's a script. So don't give me the whole, like, everybody got to do it. No, everybody does it the exact same way until they've proven to me that they're ready to go and do it on their own, right? And there are certain words that I would let people change, and there are certain words I wouldn't. Like, I get super micromanaging on this stuff, but it's also why it works, right? Like, I intro every single call the exact same way. And I do it enough that I could say at least 85 to 90% are the exact same words, the exact same tone, reflections, and all those pieces. And when I teach it to a team, same thing. They have to write and role play their way of doing it. And then we go, great, nope, start over, nope, start over, nope, start over. And when we get them to start over, that's when they relax and they stop sounding scripted, even though it's the same thing over and over again. So for me, I feel like you have to really get in there and reinforce and coach very, very tight and very, very prescriptive to the situation.
Yeah, I think the problem is that's where people give up, though, Richard. Once they have them reciting the script, that's where they give up, and then they default back into the behavior that's more comfortable for them.
Boom! As a sales leader, that's what I need to know, right? I do this all the time. Like, hey, you know, and I'm going to pick on Richard Scrow because he's been so quiet. Richard, you know, the last 2 weeks, you crushed it. You set the right amount of appointments, or you had so many good meetings that advanced to this stage, right? All those specific measurements we're talking about, Brandon, right? Like deal stage movement, right? Those kinds of things. Richard, what happened this week? Richard will go, I don't know. I'm like, no, come on, Richard. You changed something. Something changed. No, I swear I really did. Okay, give me your pitch. Roll it. Let's go. And he's going to give me his pitch. And I'm going, wait a minute. 2 weeks ago, I heard you say this, and now you're saying that. And Richard will go, yeah, I just thought it'd be better if I did that. Well, wait a minute. You were hitting your number. You were crushing your number, and you made a change? Like, Richard, why would you do that? Like, what's going on? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. Oh, I thought I could get better. Well, you have your answer. Are you ready to keep going with what you're doing, or you want to go back to what you were doing? Right? And slumps start because somebody made a change, right? Somebody made a change.
Well, Richard, I'm going to get into one thing here that I think is really important. I'm going to challenge you a little bit on this because,
go for it.
You know, I think the thing that we never acknowledge and never talk about is if you're a sales manager and you're coaching them, there's this undercurrent where you control their destiny. So they're not doing it because they believe it's the better thing to do. They're doing it because they don't want you to fire their ass, right? And I think you have the advantage because you come into an organization and you get to train and you're not ultimately going to fire that person if they're not performing well. So especially for those reps who aren't performing well, they're going to start doing exactly what that sales manager says because they're like, he's going to fire my ass if I don't do this.
But that look, I'm not saying that a sales rep shouldn't change what they're doing if it's going to get better. But as soon as you realize it doesn't, you got to make the change back. And if you're going to operate in fear of getting fired in sales, and granted, look, it's COVID and it's a real fucked up world right now, and I get it. So, and everybody needs to have their job and health insurance. So I'm not speaking in this sort of reality, but I'm speaking of the fact that, like, first of all, if I'm afraid my manager is going to fire me, well, there's probably 100 reasons why they're thinking of getting rid of me, right? And it's not going to just be this, right? And I don't want managers to come in and use fear as, a way to manage people. But I think the problem is that people aren't being accountable. Managers aren't being accountable to themselves to coach their reps appropriately because, as we said earlier, they don't know how to do it. They don't have the people skills in many cases. Reps are afraid to hold themselves accountable. To your point earlier, Brandon, about, well, I'm going to get up and I'm going to, kind of go through my emails and my LinkedIn first, and all of a sudden I need to get some more coffee, and now it's 9:30 or 10 and I haven't really been productive. I've been busy work productive, right? And people need to be held accountable. Look, I'm working with a very large organization right now, and the lack of accountability is shocking to me, right? I do a 5-week coaching session, and this week was the last week. And they said, well, Richard, the feedback we have is that, these meetings weren't as productive as they would like. And they would have liked more of this and more of that. I'm like, whoa, this is week 5. This is the last week. Why are you telling me this now? I said, if I didn't do my job, I'll own it. Like, I'm fine if I didn't give you the right comment. But wait, you waited 4 weeks to tell me it wasn't productive? Like, that's on you. That's not on me. Like, I can't read your minds. Like, that happens. I can own the fact that if the meeting wasn't productive, that it's mine. And I actually have the recordings and know that it's not. But the excuse factory is huge throughout the organization. And it's about lack of accountability for oneself, for the fear of the manager, for fear of the manager thinking they're going to get fired because they haven't been able to stand up to their boss to tell their boss, no, 100 dials a day doesn't work. So I see it kind of going in both ways, but you have to be accountable and you have to own your shit. Like, that's just the best way to describe it.
And I think there's an important part there too, where when you start to talk about this, like, oh, I'm afraid they're not gonna either, like, it's a popularity contest, like we were talking about before. Oh, my reps aren't gonna like me. Like, if you can help them and you give them the script that helps them make money, close, move deals along, make progress more quickly, or overcome obstacles, you're not gonna have anybody living in fear of using the script because the freaking thing works.
Oh, you will.
And I think that's
there, Richard. You will always have somebody who's rogue, right? You always do, unless you got a team of like 4 or 5, right? But once you get to about 6 or 7, someone always wants to come in and play, stump the buoy, right? My Howard Stern reference. Somebody wants to come in and say that I'm smarter than the leader, which is fine. But now as a leader, I got to understand how to navigate that person, manage that person, but then coach them to the direction I need them to go.
And I think we're starting to hit on this concept too. You've got a lot of tools in your toolbox as a manager or as a coach. And we talked about you've got your one-on-ones, your team meetings, your pipe reviews. These are all different ways to improve the skill set of the team and the individuals on the team. But we've danced around this concept of like coaching versus some of the more operational sides of it. But why is it that folks are confusing things like pipeline reviews with and saying, oh no, we're doing pipeline reviews. I'm coaching my team. Like, what more do you want from me here? Why does this happen, Brandon? And what do you think, Richard, what do you think we can do about this to improve?
I'm going to let Brandon go first because I've been talking for a while.
Well,
and then I'll tell him he's wrong.
This is good meeting hygiene, right? Like, start with one meeting, one purpose, right? And if you need to do coaching, some of this goes back to the fear stuff we were talking about before, because if you start bleeding between coaching and giving feedback, while you're in your pipeline review, you start to instill this fear in your team where they don't want to speak up and tell you what's going on in the deal because you might bite their head off and tell them how they should be doing it. So I think it's really important to separate those. Oftentimes pipeline reviews can be done in front of a group as well. So, what you're really trying to do is get visibility and truth into your pipeline. And how do you get truth? You create emotional or psychological safety for your team. That's the only way you're going to get somebody to open up and tell you the truth, other than forcing them. And that's a scorched earth approach, right? So separate it. And when you're doing coaching, be really clear on what the outcome you're looking for is. I'm here, I'm committed to you. I'm committed to help you grow. Here are the things, that I'm seeing that I think you could improve in, but do you agree with those? Right? And that has nothing to do with where your pipeline sits today, let alone all the other meetings that can fall into a salesperson's purview. And, one of when I was younger, I did Toastmasters, and one of the guys in Toastmasters was a preacher, and he always said to me something like, a mist in the pew is a fog in the pulpit, or something like that. And his point is, if that meeting is a little fuzzy to you on its purpose, right? The people who are in the meeting are WTFing. They're like, a pipeline review or what, just be really clear. You are here to give me visibility into the real probability of every one of these deals and what's been moved forward. And you will not be lashed out at for telling me the truth, right? I just want the truth on each deal. So I can go and be honest with our sales leader. That's it. Simple, right? And then I will get some time with you one-on-one to be really honest about where I think you can improve and my commitment to you to make you a better human being and get you that next job, get you my job if that's what you want, by the way.
I think we got our sound bite right there. That was phenomenal.
That was really good.
Well, no, I was hoping Richard would fight me a little bit on this.
No.
You just answered the question like perfectly.
I'm going to go deeper. So, you know me, I'm super tactical. I want to make sure people understand things tactically. There's a difference between a pipeline meeting and a one-on-one. And I'll put it to you this way. They're not the same thing and they should not be conducted at the same time, right? In a pipeline meeting, you have 30 minutes and you tell them to bring in their 4 best deals. And you say to them, you ask these 2 questions. Hey, Richard, I'm going to pick on you. I'm making you my bad rep for all the scenarios.
I'm a terrible rep.
But you literally say to them, you say, okay, what's the one thing that's going to keep this deal from closing?
Yes.
What's the one thing? And if they're like, I don't know, well, guess what? You found out. They haven't done anything. They don't know anything. Oh, the one thing. Then after you get that answer and you may have to dig a little bit. Okay, well, what do you mean by that? Or when you say, it's in finance, well, what do you mean it's in finance? Or, oh, it's in legal. What do you mean it's in legal? Where are we in legal? How far? You may have to dig a little bit, but that's good. Like the rep is aware. The rep is self-aware that it's in legal and this could become a challenge. Okay, well, what do we think those challenges are? So you go through. So the first question is, what's the one thing? The next question is, okay, now that we've defined that's the one thing, okay, now what? And now you put it back to the rep to figure out what they need to do next. It doesn't mean that as a manager and a leader, you can't come in and give them, but this is how you coach them to be accountable to themselves, right? And you say, look, I'm going to ask you this question. And if you don't have the answer, it's okay, but now what? And let's work that out. And now you're leading them to learn. So that to me is a pipeline meeting. And you do the top 3 or 4 deals. You can't do every deal, right? Those are the questions I would ask. On the one-on-one side, that's about professional and life development. That's about like, hey, we're going to have a one-on-one this week. And, I want to understand, how do you feel like you're doing in the role? Where do you think you want to be 6 months from now, 3 months from now in this role? Whether it's, and where do you want to be in life? Like that's different. That's a different conversation. And it's not the, hey, where do you want to be in 5 years? Let's work on a plan. No, where do you want to be in 90 days? You know what? If someone asked me in April where I wanted to be in 90 days, fucking still employed with a paycheck. Like that's honestly, that would have been my answer. Well, let's acknowledge that. Let's meet in one-on-ones. The goal is to meet the person in their headspace and understand what they're trying to achieve. And you just sit back and kind of go, okay, interesting. All right. How can I help you with that? Like what could I do to help you achieve those things? And that's a one-on-one. Like it's not as hard as I think we think it is. I think everybody thinks it has to be much more tactical with a desired outcome and all those kinds of things. Now, in a one-on-one, you can turn around and go, okay, great. Like, so here's what we talked about. Here's how I'm going to help you. What do you want to do to be held accountable to that? How do you want to hold yourself accountable? How can I help you hold yourself accountable? And what do you need me to be accountable for to help you in your career path? That to me is what a one-on-one is. So I'm going to, again, I'll stop there. And I like to get super tactical on stuff. So I'm hoping people are appreciative of that. And I haven't made them, WTF, as Brandon said a few minutes ago.
I mean,
I can tell you if you're not running your, sorry, Brandon, go ahead.
Richard and Richard, have you guys watched Columbo growing up? I mean, I loved that show growing up.
What show?
Columbo.
Columbo? No, I never did Columbo.
Columbo's the best. I mean, here's some homework for you, Mr. Harris, because I think it's on Amazon Prime now or something. But go and watch some episodes of Columbo. He is the best sales manager I've ever seen because he asks these questions, but he does it in a very diffusing manner. Sandler
speaks to him all the time, and it's one of the reasons I don't like, I don't want to have to go watch a show from, 1974. Like,
Oh, it's funny. Yeah, no, it's good stuff. It's good. It's timeless. I think Columbo is like one of those timeless shows. But he does it by just asking, oh, well, one more thing. Something doesn't add up in my brain to me, right? Help me understand, because I'm not as smart as you, right? Help me understand. You told me you think this deal is going to close, but you haven't heard back from Legal at all directly, and your champion on the deal keeps telling you, don't worry, he'll liaise with Legal on you, but you haven't heard a thing. I mean, help me out here, because I'm not seeing the dots connect here, and I think those techniques can be really diffusing for reps, because when you're in that manager role, again, it takes away some of that fear. You're not the guy who's there, potentially going to fire them if they can't give you the right answer, but you're just asking some questions and being inquisitive.
I think if you haven't run a pipe review the way Richard Harris just recommended it, I would highly encourage you. It will change the entire game. Just asking, hey, what's going to get in the way of this closing? What are we going to do about that? Those are two very great tips. I can't plug that enough. It also streamlines the hell out of that meeting.
Thank you.
Last tip. Last mistake that we see folks make here, and then also for our audience members, start getting your questions loaded up into the Q&A panel. I know we've had great banter here, but we will have some time at the end for questions. We may also take those bad boys live. But this last piece is this coaching without motivation. What does that mean? What do we mean when we say that? And then what are we talking about when we say rewards should be used to rewarding results to reinforce behavior? Brandon, what were you thinking about with this?
So, I mean, I think if you look at every great coach in history, sports coaching especially, right, where they fundamentally start from is a place where you have a team and you have a goal, and every individual on that team, they may have their own individual goals, but they don't necessarily have the means to get there, right? There's something between where they are now and what they want to achieve, and they don't necessarily want to do the things that are going to get them there, which are usually, things like calisthenics and dribbling skills if you're in basketball, and shooting skills. I mean, there are very few people who have the intrinsic motivation to wake up at 5:30 every day and shoot around for 3 hours so they perfect their shot. It's not a thing, right? And you going and coaching them and telling them, well, here's the problem with your shot, here's the problem with the way you dribble, isn't going to change that motivation. It will give them the feedback so that if they did get on the court and put in that work, that they could improve. But you need to figure out, how do I get that person to wake up at 5:30 a.m. every day and do invest in themselves, right? You need to not just get the horse to water, but you need to make them drink, or they're not going to improve. And so I think, this is where the motivation comes in, right? How do you connect the dots for the rep in a way that—
What do you do though, Brandon? What do you do to do that? Because I
human beings, right? I mean, this is a human thing, right? And I think we wouldn't have a good answer. I mean, if you listen to a lot of great coaches, 60s, 70s, and 80s, the thing they didn't understand was something that actually the social media lords of the day do understand, right? You need instant feedback, and you need it all the time, continuously. You know this, Mr. Harris, because I've seen you pretty active on LinkedIn, right? You have a pretty good idea now on what works on LinkedIn, because you get instant feedback. You get likes, you get comments, you get validation immediately when you do something. And this, triggers in your brain a dopamine release. Maybe not, as much for you as it might for a teenager who's on TikTok, but you still get it. And
it does. I am like the teenager on TikTok on LinkedIn. Like if I don't get my likes on LinkedIn, I have a problem.
I mean, it's true of every one of your reps though. Think about it, right? I mean, they're going to be, on the one hand on their laptop, working, sitting there, sending out emails, making calls. They don't get that instant feedback, but then they pick up their phone, right? And they post something on Instagram or TikTok, and they're getting likes and comments right away. And that's triggering the chemical release in their brain, because dopamine release only triggers when you have a very rapid reward coming into place as a result of an action you're taking. And over time, you start to get that dopamine release even before you post something, the anticipation of getting that reward. And it's really hard in sales now to compete with that as a sales manager, right? And so, I mean, I'm going to get a little bit into set sale here now, because this is what we've really tried to tap into, is getting that instant reward on every best action when it happens, so that you are creating habits in your reps, and you're doing it in a way that feels right for them, and not having to push them, not having to, it's in some cases, yell at them or cajole them during your weekly one-on-ones to do the right thing. But you need to be there every time they do the right thing, giving them that reinforcement.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, but I also think you can't sugarcoat it either. I mean, you do have to have those. The way I interpreted what you were saying too was, hey, I need to give reinforcement to be better. Not it's sort of how you give that reinforcement on the negative habits versus the positive, right? Like, so having that ability to congratulate when someone does it immediately right the first way. I also think the faster you can say, hey, whoa, hold on a second, Brandon. What if we tried this? Like, I noticed this and I noticed that, and this didn't seem to go as well. What do you think? And I think that, to me, is the piece that gets people out of bed, is that they know their manager cares. Yes, we all need our strokes on the back, and absolutely you need that instant feedback. 100% wouldn't disagree. But I also think we have to be willing to come in and say, hey, here's something I'm not sure about. Right. And, to your Columbo reference of like, well, help me understand how we think this is going to work well, because I think that's the piece that people like about their managers. People like their managers because they give honest feedback. They're direct, right? To a certain extent, they don't threaten, right?
Yeah.
Right. Which I definitely heard you say. And I agree. We're not driving the fear factor, but I do think you have to get
separate two things just real quick, Richard, because I don't want to confuse two things. You're talking about giving feedback. And actually giving feedback, it helps to actually have a little bit of distance between their action and the feedback they get when it comes to something negative. So I'll actually reference something I talked about before. So that same preacher who was talking to me about the mist in the pulpit, he also said, one thing that he learned was never give feedback to a preacher the same day they preach, because it's so emotional for them, right? If you give them a little bit of distance and let them just breathe, and then look back and detach themselves from their action a little bit, it actually helps, right? So when it comes to corrective feedback, timing isn't nearly as important. But when it comes to positive reinforcement, I mean, we're really talking about a chemical release here, right?
Yeah.
And chemical release is tied to rewards, right? As human beings, we still have some very basic needs that tie back to survival. And when we have those needs met as a result of the actions we take, it reinforces those actions in our brain, and we start to build habits, right? And hopefully they're good ones, right?
I totally agree with you. So let me ask you this question, right? In what you guys do, or how you help, or how you see this. Totally agree. Hey, we want to give that positive reinforcement as soon as possible. I definitely don't want to have, Brandon go on a call and do, these three things right, but then say, hey, great job, Brandon. You did this and you did this and you did this. But, here's one thing you should have improved. Like, I agree. Like, I don't want them to get off the call and immediately get that negative piece, because they're going to hear that negative a whole lot harder and more harshly than they are the positives. To your point, you said, you never give the preacher, don't give them feedback on the same day. Is that the true in sales though? Like, is there a time of like, hey, I listened to this call from this morning, like let the day go out, let them finish the day, let them have their positives. And then at the end of the day, can you do it? Or do you really need a day? Do you really need to let them sleep over it? And what do you think? I don't know the answer.
It depends on the relationship you have with them. If you've cultivated a really positive relationship, then they know where you're coming from. If you've constantly reinforced, hey, I'm just here to support you. And in fact, feedback doesn't need to be negative. I mean, at its core, good feedback is simply, you took this action and you got this result. I'm not sure if you see that you got this result, but I want you to see the connection between your action and this result. It doesn't need to be, you did it wrong. I mean, anytime you're injecting your opinion in there, you're really screwing up the feedback loop, because you're making it emotional and personal versus just making it scientific, right? It's like, you wanted to get a response from this prospect about the pricing that you shared with them, right? You did this, but here's what you got, right? You didn't get a clear answer on your pricing. And so let's diagnose what could have been done differently so you could have gotten a better answer, right? And so it really should be simple and scientific and not personal.
Define that a little bit more. So when you say it's simple and scientific and not personal, meaning, hey, I want to talk about the behavior, and that might not be the right word, but
No, I think that's
talk
good.
about the tactic you used.
Action. Yeah.
And but this is not a reflection of you, Brandon. It's like, hey, this tactic I feel like didn't work, but that doesn't mean you don't know how to do it. It just means we want to talk about what would be the best tactic. Is that what I'm hearing you suggest?
And tie it to the outcome, right? Right and wrong. I mean, I think this is something that we get too tied up in. It's like, you did it wrong or you did it right. And just talk about the outcome, right? It's like, you did this and you got this outcome. Is this the outcome you wanted? I don't think so, right? So let's see how what you did could be improved so that you get the outcome that's going to help you make you successful. Because in the end, I'm here to make you successful, Richard, right?
Got it. Okay. Thank you for clarifying. Yeah, that's
I mean, I think it's the best way to coach people. I mean, tell me I'm wrong. I'm always trying to improve on this, but in giving feedback to people, a little bit of that detachment helps a lot. It's you are not your actions. I mean, you're not even your ideas. These are just things that exist out there. And if you can change those, you can change your destiny as a rep and as a human being.
Got it.
I think one of the things that's important to tie it back to what we were talking about before was like using the one-on-one effectively. This is also where understanding, the why is somebody doing what they're doing? Why are they working at your organization? What are their career hopes and aspirations? That's also a very good lens to couch that through. Where if you've got somebody that says, hey, I want to set the world on fire. I want to be a top rep. It's very easy to give them feedback through the lens of like, hey, you didn't get the outcome that you wanted here. And we probably want to work on this skill, this tactic, this tool to put you in the position where you can get the thing that you want. So framing it and having a good understanding of that why is also, I would believe, incredibly important when delivering that type of feedback and keeping people motivated in the face of what would be constructive feedback, hard feedback, et cetera. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Works for me.
I think you probably want to get into some of the Q&A because we have a ton of questions. I just saw you shot me a couple on private chat. You want to jump into some of those? I know we have like 8 minutes left or so.
Yeah, we've got a little bit of time left here. Oh, where did that go? That is not what I wanted to do.
Right.
Here we go. Don't look behind the curtain, everybody. So first question coming in here live is just, when you're providing coaching, right? Then you say, you've got to work on this thing. How quickly do you expect a result from that? Like, is there a time frame that you look for, or is it something where it depends quite a bit on a lot of different contexts? And let's start with, Richard, you want to start with that, and then Brandon, we can go.
Sure. Well, obviously, there's always it depends place, right? Like there's some scenario in your head, Nora, that's making you ask this question. I don't know what that is, but that's okay. So I'll give you my generic. I expect some level of immediate change, right? And now the way I do it is not, hey, Nora, I want to give you this feedback. Next time you have a call, I'd love for you to try this tactic. But that's not enough, right? So Nora, let's role play it. But first, Nora, I'm going to be the rep and you get to be the customer. So as a sales leader, I'm going to put myself in their shoes, right? I'm going to put myself and say that I'm willing to get my hands dirty. And then I will say, okay, Nora, now you do it, but you do it in your words. And Nora does it. And oftentimes I'll stop someone and go, whoop, start over again. Nope, start over again. Nope. Let's get that dialed and let them go through it 4 or 5 times. So now I can expect that the next time that happens, they can make the change. Now it can also, this is the part where it depends. If it's, hey, we're role playing this one negotiation part of the deal. Well, it depends on how soon you're going to have that next negotiation conversation. You may not have another one for a week or a couple of days. So now as a leader, I would at the end of that say, okay, so Nora, we role played this really, really good. How are you going to remember to do this? What can I do to help you remember? What if you, Nora, go and send me an email scripting out what you're going to say and just send me that email? And the reason I would have Nora do that is, one, not because I want to hold her accountable to it, but I want to help, again, ingrain that new behavior into her psyche, right? There's something that happens if you've role played it 4 times, and then you go write it out 4 times. Because even when you're writing it out, you're running it through your head 20 times. And so to me, that's what I'm trying to encourage. And I would even explain that to the person. I would say, hey, Nora, the reason I want you to do this, I'm not trying to micromanage you. I want to make sure it sticks because you said you want to get better at this. So this is a way to help that. And by the way, if you have another call coming up, let's have a 5-minute chat about it beforehand so that we can, again, let's get your brain fresh. It's like studying for a test kind of a thing. I'll stop there.
That's good stuff. Richard, you shot me one. I just want to pick this up because I think it's really important. It's a role distinction. The question was sales enablement manager versus direct sales manager. And I've had to manage the sales enablement team quite a few times in my career. And I think sales enablement needs to think strategically so that the sales manager doesn't, right? Sales enablement needs to be looking down the road and understanding what's blocking reps so they can continue to run at full speed. So, if you see certain conversations coming up again and again, or it's very hard for them to describe pricing and share that with prospects, then you need to work with the broader team so they don't have to figure out what's the best way to communicate this to prospects, right? So I think that the sales managers often get pulled into these, I need to work with marketing, I need to work with legal. And if you're doing that, it's really not going to be effective on a macro level. Sales enablement should be trying to think at that macro level. And if you're at the size of an organization, we've actually have some good numbers. We've actually done with you, Mr. Scrow, but at MSP, somewhere around 250 employees, most organizations start to put in sales enablement. And the reason you're doing it is because it's really inefficient for an individual sales manager to have to go to multiple departments to try to solve problems. And ultimately, sales enablement should be solving these problems once they see they're starting to become issues for the team so they can continue to run at full speed and remove those blocks that sit in their way.
And with that, we are actually slightly over time, gentlemen.
I'll stick around if we can. If anybody else can stick around, I'll stick around and answer questions.
Yeah, happy to as well.
I want to make sure that we let folks know. And for those of you who stuck around till the end, we appreciate you being here. Obviously, Brandon and Richard Harris, two of the best, and this recording will be available afterwards. So if folks have any more questions they want to throw into the Q&A panel, we'll give that another 30 seconds or so. But as folks are doing that, just any key takeaways, Brandon and Richard. Brandon, let's start with you. Any one nugget that you want folks to head home with as some of these folks are stepping out?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing is let's talk about honesty, like real hard honesty, and maybe you can take this recording and give it to your manager if you feel like it's really hard to have that conversation about things like, hey, I'm being tracked on activity metrics and they're bullshit and they're not helping me. And oftentimes I wake up in the morning and I am behaving to the metric, not doing what's best for me and the organization. And so I think, if you're only taking one thing away, there's a lot of tactical stuff. And I think we're going to send out a worksheet to help people with some coaching planning. But, maybe this is the moment that you get that little nudge to have that really honest conversation with the people around you and your leader in your organization to say, hey, we're doing some things that aren't working. And I don't know how to fix those right away, but I want to make sure we're talking about them.
I think that's great. I think that's genius. And I also think it's a way for you to take stock of the organization you're at. Like, this is if you're a salesperson, and actually I'm going to use fear. If you're a sales leader, you should be scared shitless, because what I'm about to say is going to blow your mind. Your sales reps are always free agents, 100%. And if you can't adapt to run a team in a humane way, they're going to leave. Now, in the COVID world, that may be to your advantage, right? Fair enough. But people are going to remember how you were treated when things turn around next year. They're going to remember how they were treated, and they're going to leave. And it's super important that happened. So I think that's the one big key takeaway is you need to be able to upskill yourself as leaders. And all reps can take this recording and hashtag blame Richard and say, Richard says, if you guys don't shape up, I'm shipping out, right?
Richard, I'm going to add a number to this, because we actually have seen this when we implement set sale at organizations. We get a lot of data almost instantly on where reps are engaging and which reps are actually moving deals forward. That's the biggest thing you get an almost instant picture into. And I can tell you across the board in every organization, about 15% of your reps have already left your organization.
Yep.
And I'm not, they could be job shopping, or they could just be in that phase where they've realized I'm never going to be successful here because my manager's an ass or whatever it might be, right? And they have checked out.
Yep.
And they'll still put up good numbers on metrics. They're sending out the emails, but there's no deal progress at all.
Yep. Or they've mastered the craft and there's no reason for them to stick around. I see that. I also see that happen in startup world when people hit their 4-year cliff. They're like, why am I sticking around? Like, they're not giving me any more options, right? I need to go maximize my role. I need to go maximize my long-term income. And if they're not going to make me want to stick after 4 years, why would I go? Why would I stay? Right? Even if I'm hitting goal and hitting quota and all those things, I'm making you a billionaire. Like, reps are tired of making other people millionaires and billionaires, right? We know that now. So I think that's a piece. There's a question that came in I'd love to ask, which is the startup mentality, right? Overcome the resistance of I don't need your help. And how do you say, yes, you do? Again, it depends on if that rep is being successful, right? If they're being successful, I'm also the kind of manager who kind of recognizes that, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. And I just sit back and I wait for them to fall. And I just wait and I wait and I wait. And then I can go spend my time on other people, right? That being said, you do have to have those moments where it's like, well, hey, here's the deal. You're telling me you don't want my help, but you're not achieving goals. So, I want to help you and I can't force you to take my help, but I can assure you that if we don't see some level of change, we're going to have a different conversation. And there's nothing wrong with saying that. There's nothing wrong with being open to that and saying it politely with empathy, but it's a reality. And to a certain extent,
I think you can make that a positive, right?
I
you can
totally agree.
Positive by saying, you told me that you want to get this in your career, right? You want my job. To get my job, you're going to have to blow out your number.
Right.
You're not blowing out your number. I'm here to make sure that you get this job. And we talked about accountability. So if you've done all the steps, it should be a positive conversation, right?
Yep. Well, I think that's part of it too, but I also think to a certain extent, Brandon, it goes back to what you said a minute ago, is that 15% have already checked out. So if you're in a startup world and they're not doing well and they're unwilling to be coached, they've already checked out. You might as well, in my opinion, get rid of them. Much as I hate to say it, and the right way to do it is to hug them out the door. That doesn't mean drop a hammer. It means find a way to say, look, this just isn't the right fit. It's not that we think you're a bad salesperson. We just think it's not it's not the right fit here. And we want you to go be successful somewhere else, right? We don't want you to, nobody terminates anybody with the intent that they become unsuccessful in life, right? It's like, hey, go be a better you. And it's often like a personal breakup, right? We've all been in relationships longer than we should have at some point in our life, but we stuck around hoping someone would change, or that I could adapt or they could adapt, and that doesn't work. So at some point it's healthier for everybody to separate and separate from each other. And again, each person becomes healthier from that, the organization and the individual.
I think it's great. And folks, we've seen enough drop off here. We've gotten through a bunch of the questions. Once again, Richard Harris, phenomenal. Thank you again for sharing some time with us today,
pleasure.
first time in a while. And Brandon, thank you for helping us pull this content together. Always great working with you, and look forward to doing it again real soon, gentlemen. On behalf of the entire community, the team behind the scenes, and myself, I've got pages of notes here. This was great. Everybody stay safe and have a wonderful rest of your day. Take care, y'all.
Bye, everybody.
Cheers.
Be well.